Good morning. It is Monday, the 15th of December. I'm Méabh Mc Mahon, and this is Europe Today, Euronews' daily live fix of European news and analysis. Coming up today, after spending his Friday on the front line in the embattled city of Kupiansk that Moscow claimed to have captured, Ukraine's President Zelenskyy has moved on to Berlin. On his agenda, face-to-face talks with American officials, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. The Ukrainian president has hinted that Kyiv could drop its long-held ambition of joining NATO in return for Western security guarantees. For more on the talks and the latest attempts to end the ongoing war, I'm joined here in the studio by Maria Tadeo, our EU News editor. Good morning, Maria. Good morning. Great to have you with us. So look, marathon talks taking place in Berlin. Any movement?
Well, marathon talks because we understand they went on for more than 5 hours yesterday, Maeve, and they will continue this morning. Of course, the German Chancellor, who, to his credit, has really taken the lead now in the negotiations when it comes to the Europeans hosting the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and a U.S. delegation, which, as you alluded to, included Steve Witkoff, of course, that's a special envoy, but also Jared Kushner, who is the son-in-law to President Trump. And the two men, we should note, were instrumental, remember, in negotiating a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. Now, in terms of the details, we have not heard from the Ukrainians. They argue they will only brief after the talks are completed today, but we did hear from the Americans, and hopefully we can put it up on the screen. Steve Witkoff yesterday saying we had in-depth discussions regarding the 20-point plan for peace, economic agendas, and more. Remember, initially this plan was 28. It was deemed to be too in favor of Russia. The goal now for Ukraine and the Europeans is to sway it in Kyiv's favor. As I say, not a lot has officially been confirmed. There has been speculation, however, that Ukraine could be prepared now to drop its ambition to join NATO if it can get NATO-like security guarantees. There has also been talk about fast-track EU membership. Of course, one of the dates that was floated was January 1st, 2027. The Ukrainians have not officially confirmed this, but I can tell you the diplomats I spoke with over the weekend said this is really not an option. It's not real. Ukraine cannot join in a year. But of course, you understand the logic here. The U.S. would offload some of the NATO responsibility to the EU, and the Ukrainians keep that momentum and that pressure to accelerate their talks. But as I say, diplomats telling me this is not feasible. We've got to be realistic.
Got to be realistic. And of course, this week, Maria's crucial week for the European Union, for Brussels, as it strives to strike a deal on Ukraine's funding. What are the chances?
What are the chances? Very difficult. We've talked about make or break crunch time. This is really now crunch time and decision time. Two things just very quickly. On Friday, the European Union taken now steps to keep the Russian frozen assets, which are held here in Belgium by Euroclear, permanently frozen. But of course, we know that the Belgians continue to resist it, but also a new element, Italy also reaching out to the Commission and saying, well, perhaps this is now the time to push for a plan B. However, those who favor the frozen assets and the reparations loans say there is no time for a plan B. We should go ahead with this. At this point, flip a coin.
Flip a coin. Well, stay tuned to Euronews to find out, because, of course, that EU summit is taking place later this week. We've foreign affairs ministers gathering here today. So Euronews.com, of course, your source for all your news and analysis. Thank you so much, Maria Tadeo, for all that. But coming up, we'll be joined by Laurence Tubiana, the French economist and climate diplomat who served as France's climate change ambassador for the 2015 Paris Climate Conference, making her the architect of the landmark Global Climate Act. At 74, Laurence Tubiana still works tirelessly to try to combat climate change as CEO of the European Climate Foundation. So, Laurence Tubiana, thank you so much for taking time out to join us this morning on Europe Today.
Hello, nice to have me.
Yeah, great to have you this early on a Monday morning. Laurence, look, minds are occupied, as you've heard there, with the ongoing war in Ukraine. So the climate emergency has kind of been politically parked here, if you like, in Brussels. But 10 years on from the Paris Agreement, are you confident it is still intact?
It's not, meaning it works, but not to speed enough. It works because we have seen a major transformation of the world economy, in particular in the green technology, the rise of China investment in renewable energy, the fact that almost all countries have a climate law now since Paris, and 88% of global emissions are covered by a commitment to be net zero by the mid-century. So, and you see every day, even the public awareness is absolutely not comparable. Even the media, I think, now understand the problems because, of course, climate change is now, unfortunately, really putting enormous stress on many, many countries and many, many societies every year these days.
But we have a climate change denier in the White House, President Donald Trump. How does that impact your efforts?
I think it's very damaging, more than probably the first moment when Donald Trump decided in 2017 to withdraw from Paris Agreement. And you see the pressure, of course, on many countries, in particular small countries, and you see more aggressivity for the oil and gas producers that really want the Paris Agreement to be delayed or blocked. And so we feel the pressure. It's a very difficult geopolitical situation. But the interesting thing is at COP30, you have 85 countries that decided to plan for a way out of fossil fuel. You know, so on one side, nobody, minus, of course, US has decided to withdraw from Paris Agreement. The second element is now there are countries that are more decided than ever to get out of the dependence from fossil fuel, including Brazil.
So you think that was a success? Because many would have considered that a failure, the COP30 this year in Brazil.
It is not. It's complex, of course. Again, it's more violent and aggressive than has never. I haven't seen since my whole life working on climate, I've never seen such aggressivity from the US, including, as you know, the pressure in particular on Europe. And that's so important that Europe stand up and don't decide to go, you know, for more import for fossil fuel and LNG, even from US. We have to be independent, and economic security is energy security these days.
And just finally, the EU wants to be carbon neutral by 2050. Do you think that's still achievable?
I think it's achievable if we continue the good work that has been done all over the 5 last years. If we increase renewable energy, if we now decarbonize, of course, the industry, we can be there. And we will be in time for 2030, minus 55%, which was already enormous. And then I think we are in a good shape.
Okay. On that positive note, we can bring that conversation to an end. Laurence Tubiana, thank you so much for joining us here this morning on Europe Today.
Bye.
But now, moving on, it is time to reflect on the deadly attacks on Bondi Beach this Sunday during Hanukkah celebrations that took the lives of at least 16 people. It was Australia's worst shooting since a massacre almost 30 years ago that saw the country then introduce some of the world's toughest gun laws. Political leaders across the European Union have sent condolences to Australia, expressing solidarity with the victims and their families. For more on this story, we're joined by Euronews' political correspondent, Stefan Kobe. Good morning, Stefan.
Good morning,
Thank you so
Maeve.
much for being with us here. Tell us, what do we know so far?
Well, what happened was that at least 2 gunmen opened fire at a crowd that was at Bondi Park, as you said, about 1,000 people. Many of them were participants of the Jewish Hanukkah festival. So the suspects opened fire at the crowd, sending panic crowds running in all directions. The attackers, by the way, were father and son, as police later said, 50 and 24 years old. One of them was killed in a shootout with law enforcement. The other one was shot and is in life-threatening condition in a hospital as we speak. Police also removed explosive devices found in a nearby vehicle. Police also said that there might be a third suspect, but they caution against any speculations as investigations, of course, continue. Australian authorities declared it an anti-Semitic terrorist attack and an act of, brutal force. Eyewitnesses reported that the gunmen were deliberately pushing aside bystanders who visibly were not participants of the Hanukkah festival. So that leads us to assume that it was a precise targeted attack on the Jewish community here at Bondi Beach. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese condemned the attack sharply, saying an attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian. Take a listen.
This is a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah, an act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism that has struck the heart of our nation. There is no place for this hate, violence and terrorism in our nation. Let me be clear. We will eradicate it.
Prime Minister Albanese there. Meanwhile, Stefan, one brave man actually put his life at risk trying to stop the killer. Tell us about Ahmed.
Absolutely. Ahmed, a 43-year-old father of two and an owner of a fruit shop, and so a pretty much regular guy. And you see him here tackling one of the attackers, bringing him down and then pointing the gun at him. You see here on the right, the gunman now getting up back on his feet and slowly moving away. So this, of course, half the firepower of the two gunmen. Australian authorities calling this an unusual act of bravery and calling him a hero. He certainly saved probably a lot of lives here. As I said, one was killed and one was severely injured.
And Ahmed, I think, is doing well. He's recovering in hospital. Stefan, what has been the reaction here in Europe and also among Jewish communities? They must be rather on edge this Monday. Yeah, well, the European leaders condemned almost immediately the attack. French President Emmanuel Macron saying in Sydney an anti-Semitic terrorist attack struck families gathered to celebrate Hanukkah. France extends its thoughts to the victims, the injured and the loved ones. We share the pain of the Australian people and will continue to fight relentlessly against anti-Semitic hatred, which hurts us all wherever it strikes. And further to the east in Germany, Chancellor Friedrich Merz saying, the anti-Semitic attack at Bondi Beach during Hanukkah leaves me utterly shocked. My thoughts are with the victims and their families. This is an attack on our shared values. We must fight anti-Semitism here in Germany and around the world. And of course, France and Germany having had sad experiences with anti-Semitism. Indeed, Stefan Grobe, thank you so much for that update. But now coming back to Brussels news, as you heard earlier, EU heads of state and government are poised for a major gathering in Brussels this week. The most important perhaps for years, because on the table, a loan for Ukraine to keep the country afloat for the next 2 years. Our Jakub Janis has a little refresher for you on the frozen Russian assets earmarked to foot the bill.
Day called Europe Week. Well, Brussels just locked down 210 billion euros of Russian central bank cash. Most of it sits right here in Euroclear. Think of it as the world's most nervous piggy bank. Until now, keeping it frozen required a unanimous vote every 6 months. That made the cash a hostage to vetoes, especially Hungary's. So, last week the EU pulled a legal trick and an emergency clause. In times of crisis, it allows for majority voting to bypass unanimity, so no single country can veto. Now, the assets are frozen indefinitely. And to unfreeze them, you would need another majority vote in favor of Russia. Good luck with that. Moscow has already sued Euroclear, but the EU calls it speculative. And Belgium is nervous about the legal risks, but the clock is ticking. Why the rush, you ask? This Thursday, the EU leaders meet for a make-or-break summit. They need to raise 90 billion euros to keep Ukraine from collapsing. And with Russian sabotage already hitting Europe, we could be next. Viktor Orban, a well-known practitioner of veto power, calls the move a Brazilian dictatorship. But for others, it's a preview of a stronger EU. One that finally stops letting a single country, in times of emergency, turn off the lights.
Jakub Janis reporting there. And just speaking of Hungary, I don't know if you noticed, but this weekend tens of thousands took to the streets of the capital, Budapest, to protest against the Prime Minister Viktor Orban and call for his resignation. For more on that story, do visit Euronews.com. But that does bring this edition of Europe Today to an end. Thank you so much for tuning in. Join us again tomorrow morning. We'll bring you all the latest from Strasbourg, where MEPs are gathering for their last session before the Christmas break. Thanks again for watching. See you soon on Euronews.
Decision-making is crucial in businesses.
The cloud spending will surpass the $1 trillion mark in Europe.
You have to love the problem. making equity great again.
I don't believe in digitalizing for the sake of digitalization.
AI is a new power, a new capability.
We speak to some of the brightest minds in industry to address the key topics on the business agenda.
Euronews.